Hello and welcome back. This month I'm talking about adaptations, specifically movie and TV show adaptations of books. And today I'm going to be talking about adaptations that age up the child characters in the original work. Now by that I don't mean something like with the Harry Potter movies, for instance, where they cast age-appropriate actors at the beginning, but then the movies came out much more slowly than the characters grew up, so they were all in their 20s by the time that their characters were meant to be in their late teens. That's not really what I'm referring to here. What I'm talking about here is more like in the Giver movie, where in the book it's specifically said that the characters are turning 12, but in the movie they're in their late teens, and they're said to be in their late teens, like there's no attempt to pretend that they're younger. It seems like that sort of thing is a very common practice in movies that are adapted from children's books. And like most changes that are made, it can be done well, but it's often done badly. So I wanted to talk about that, about why it might be that they would choose to do that, and how it impacts the story. One reason that might be the case is that young children tend to not be great actors. I mean, don't get me wrong, I'm sure there are exceptions, but just by and large, I feel like you're more likely to find someone who has the acting experience and skill needed to portray, for instance, the main character of a movie, if you cast a teenager as opposed to a young child. That would become more and more the case the younger that the character gets. So for instance, in the live-action How the Grinch Stole Christmas, it's no surprise that they replaced little Cindy Lou who was no more than 2, with an actress who, is clearly older than 2, particularly with the expanded role that character plays in the live-action version. You just couldn't expect an actual 2-year-old to do that part justice. Even aside from the abilities of child actors, there's the issue of child labor laws as well, and so if a character has a huge amount of screen time, but they're only allowed to work a certain amount of time a day, and they also have to, be devoting time to their schooling and whatnot, that may make it difficult logistically to use a younger kid to play a part that was a child of that age in the book. For example, in the novel Alice in Wonderland, Alice is, I believe, like 7 years old, but I don't know that there's ever been a live-action adaptation made where she was 7, and it would probably be very difficult to do logistically, even if they were to be able to find a 7-year-old who could play the part. The decision to age up a child character may also sometimes have to do with changes that are made when doing the adaptation. Like, for instance, in the novel Tuck Everlasting, the protagonist, Winnie, is 11. However, in the movie, they really emphasize the potential romance between her and Jesse, and so her being 11, it would be gross. If she's in her late teens, then it's much more appropriate. In the novel, there's barely an implication of potential romance between Winnie and Jesse. He does tell her, because he drank this water that makes him stay forever 17 years old, and so he does tell her that if she waits to drink the water until she is his age, that maybe they could get together. But it doesn't really come across as him having any interest in her at the present time, and it's just one thing that he throws out there as a possibility when he's trying to get her to consider eventually drinking the water. The decision in the movie to take those little hints of maybe someday and turn it into an actual tragic love story, that necessitates aging her up. In some cases, too, aging a character up in the adaptation can actually seem more appropriate for the original storyline. A good example of this, in my opinion, is the Narnia movies, the ones that came out in the early 2000s. All of the child characters are aged up at least a little bit, but the one where it's most obvious is Prince Caspian. The character of Prince Caspian is 13 in the book, but is played by an adult actor. However, in both the novel and the adaptation, he's leading an army and challenging his uncle for the throne. And it's like, it makes much more sense if it's an older teen or a young adult doing that, as opposed to a 13-year-old. The same thing could be said for the Pevensey siblings in The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. I feel like if they had been the ages that they were in the book, the general audience reaction would have been, who on earth is letting children fight in a battle? Whereas if Peter is clearly in his late teens and only Lucy comes across as very young, then it's a little bit more acceptable. So obviously, I feel like there are pros and cons to this. On the one hand, sometimes it can make the story more believable. If the original novel had kids that were very young doing stuff that young kids probably shouldn't be doing, like fighting in battles or whatever, then maybe aging them up makes it more acceptable and believable on screen. I tend to not be in favor of changing things unnecessarily, but I wouldn't call that an unnecessary change. On the other hand, changing aspects of the original story that require you to then age the character up, I'm not a big fan of that. It's like, It wasn't there in the original, so you don't need to age the character up for it. With Tuck Everlasting, for instance, it would have been easy to just cut that one line from Jesse about how we could even get married someday, or however he said it, rather than making Winnie his age and having a whole romance storyline between them that wasn't in the book. So I feel like depending on whether the reason for increasing the character's age is based on stuff that's in the original story or stuff that was added or changed, that makes a big difference as far as whether I find that to be a good reason for making the change with their ages. In some cases, I feel like making the character older than they were in the book can undermine the story, either because the character was meant to be very young and innocent and naive, and therefore making them older makes that less believable or requires that to be changed, or depending on what themes are present, sometimes having an older character can kind of undermine that, like if it's a coming-of-age story, for instance, or if it's specifically a book about kids that are on the brink of becoming teenagers. I feel like that's one of the main problems with the characters' ages in the movie version of The Giver. Sometimes it can also make sequels difficult, like if the characters are older than they're supposed to be in the movie based on the first book, but then there's a series. Then if you eventually want to make sequels, that could be difficult. Like for instance, in the Percy Jackson series by Rick Riordan, the main character is 12 in the first one and 16 in the last one. In the Lightning Thief movie, he's in his late teens already, so you wonder, like, if they had been able to make more than just the one sequel for that, where would it have gone? So this is something that I have very mixed feelings about. On the one hand, I feel like it can be done well and for the right reasons, and I certainly understand why things like the difficulty of finding a 2-year-old that can act, or child labor laws making it difficult to have, young children be on set as much as would be needed, would make it seem very desirable to cast someone a little bit older. On the other hand, I feel like it's a decision that needs to be made carefully considering the character's characterization and whether it would need to change, the themes of the story, whether the child being young is part of the point. Like, I don't think that you could do a version of To Kill a Mockingbird with a teenage scout, for instance. Like, her being young and having a child's view of things, that's the point. And for anything based on a series, I feel like it's important to consider if there are sequels, how will those go, and will the actors and the characters, the age that they're being portrayed as, still be reasonable for those sequels. In a lot of cases, I feel like aging characters up from books to movies or books to TV shows can detract from the viewing experience, especially if you've read the book and you know what age they're supposed to be. But I'm not going to say that it's always a bad choice. Like many changes that are made in adaptations, it can be done well, it's just often done badly. Anyway, I hope that you enjoyed this. If you liked it and you want to see more from me, be sure to subscribe. I post new videos every Monday and Thursday.